Hey guys, welcome to another Going Dutch. I'm Mike Sonbeek, also known as Dutchbig on Twitter. Thankfully joined by Preston Wilson, former MLB player, one of the greatest follows on Twitter. Appreciate you coming on, Preston.
Oh, no problem, man. Look, I told you when you told me you were getting this thing going, I told you I was going to come on. So, I wouldn't miss it. Wouldn't miss
Yeah,
it.
no, this has been anticipated. This has been anticipated for a long time. But honestly, man, on Twitter, you challenge. I don't know if it's like something just me, but you challenge people. I think like the way the stuff. I mean, obviously, I'm a white guy. I don't know any. I can't even speak on the experience of what some of the subjects that you talk about, but like I've learned just so much just from like looking what you're tweeting. Like you tweet something, I'll Google it, like learn the history of it. So like I really appreciate that just on a bottom level, like just not even any sports related. Like right now I don't even see you as a baseball player anymore. I see you as like like an inspiration on a social movement.
Well, I think the thing that I try to bring to it is the point of view from humanity. And I think if you
Mm-hmm.
can start with that, everything else could make sense because let's be honest, we have a whole bunch of ideas and notions in our heads that have accumulated over the years that quite frankly aren't true, but we don't know
Mm-hmm.
any different because that's been our existence. Like we don't know that. Um, so once we start having these discussions and we hear other people who have different life experiences or different points of view, we have to really fight the notion of trying to separate ourselves from that, or creating it as an abstract concept in our mind instead of finding a way to understand if this is real. And then once you can be human enough to understand that these people may be going through these things, then it's kind of like a paint by number system. You can start filling in the areas to each number to make that picture more complete. And all that is really just wanting to educate yourself. I think anything I throw out there, I try to have already researched it, backed it up, read it, know that there's different uh, different studies that have backed it up. So I'm never asking anyone to take my opinion or my feelings. Whenever I say something, it's rooted in fact, and there's a historical basis behind it to help you understand what I'm saying.
What do you feel like when like you say that and then I mean, noticing just off Twitter. I mean, Twitter is going to be Twitter. There's always going to be people that maybe even don't even actually believe that opinion. They just want to get attention. But like, I'll notice when you tweet something, there'll still be the guys that come out and disagree. But like, for the people that actually believe that, like, in a white family, I have family that I've started to cut off in 2020 now. Which I probably thought I should have done that years ago, that they just still don't seem to get it. And like, to me, I've had this like problem is like, you know it's hard to cut off that family, even though it's probably the smart thing to do, because if they still don't get it, if they still don't get like the Black Lives Matter movement, if they don't see why players are kneeling for the flag in sports. So like, how do you like, would you give that, like, what would your advice be to people who are in like familiar situations?
My first advice would be to try to help that person understand that the perception that they have of this country and the freedom in this society is ill-conceived. And if you
Mm-hmm.
can get past that, then you can get to the learning. But if that person just will absolutely not accept that there is systemic racism, that there is not equal protection under the law for all of us, that we all treated the same, that the playing field isn't even, if they're not even willing to consider that as a premise, then those are people that may not ever be touched. And you just have to be honest with it, because they're either lying to you or they're lying to themselves. But either way, no information is coming in. So some people you're just not going to be able to reach. But there are some people that I've spoken to who really bristled at it at first, because we all are taught to believe that in this American society that we have, it's a meritocracy. You earn what you get, you earn what you work for. If you want it bad enough, if you work hard enough for it, you're going to succeed. Uh, But what they don't really understand is that there have been impediments along the way to keep people who are doing all of those things from succeeding at the rate of other people. It doesn't mean that there isn't opportunity at all. It just means that there's a lot more steps, a lot more boxes those people have to check off to achieve what other people do in a relatively more easy fashion.
Yeah, because like I have family that's like, oh, I worked for what I wanted. I worked for what I got. It's like, but you were already 2 steps in front. Like that is what you don't understand. You didn't work. Yeah, maybe no one is ever saying like a white person didn't work hard to get where they were, but like you were already front. You had a head start on everything.
Well,
and like, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No,
Right,
and
go
like
ahead.
I made this point because on Facebook I have all my family there, and my family's a very diverse political family. So right now we're in like a civil war. So like, I said like there's just so many things that has been rooted in America, and maybe you could, and you don't know because you just don't experience it. You've never experienced in your life. You don't know how, like, for an example, the war on drugs, how that has affected so many people. Because I grew up in Pembroke Pines. It's a upper middle class suburban area. I don't know about any of that stuff because I don't have any experience with it. Like, so like what I made like a post one time and it's saying like, there's so many things that we don't know just because we were lucky enough to not even be around it. And we don't know what those people have gone through because, the war on drugs didn't affect us. Prison population doesn't affect us. Like bad healthcare doesn't affect us. Like, because we were lucky. We were rooted in the privilege and we were a few steps ahead.
Yeah, and I think that to me that's the tough group because they have worked hard. They have worked hard and they know that. But they also don't understand the other side of it, of how there are people who are working just as hard as you did that can't get a loan for that house in your neighborhood, that could not get a loan for that small business venture that they wanted to go out there and do. Their kids were not accepted into this school because their parents didn't go to that school or their uncle didn't go to that school. But certain people have those privileges. And I think that's the hard thing to break down because what they accept as the status quo or just normal life has built-in advantages for them. When in the Sports Illustrated piece I talked about schools, how you have these legacy schools, and you have certain individuals in this country who will say, I don't understand why we even still have, affirmative action. Why do we even still have programs that make sure a certain amount of minorities get into certain jobs or certain environments? And the one thing that they miss in that argument is that they have had affirmative action for a very long time because most of those Ivy League schools, all of these places where these Fortune 500 companies, Major League Baseball, all of these huge, massive organizations, a lot of their talent is coming from Ivy League schools. Those Ivy League schools are legacy schools, which means you get in because your family got in. Yeah, you have to have a certain grade point average, but you still don't have to reach that par of other students who are coming in. Those other students who aren't legacy, they have to be the best of what's available. You just got to be good enough to get in. And then your name takes you the rest of the way. That is affirmative action in a way that's already been in place. Like those are guaranteed spots. There are schools out there where 70 or 80% of their annual admissions is legacy students. So when you look at it like that, you have to understand, like, that's a program that was put to benefit the wealthy families that have been in place in this country. They started those institutions. Their family gets to go to those institutions. And I mean, yeah, it's great. I would love for every American to be able to do that. And I think that's the point that I try to express in everything. And I say, this is not about someone wanting more than someone else. This is not about me wanting to say that African American people or Black people should be able to get a job before a more qualified person does. None of that is what I'm expressing. What I'm saying is, if we really want things, or if you really want to say you're invested in a society where everything's equal, the playing field's equal, then we have to acknowledge these things that have gone on that have brought us to this point. You go back to the Homestead Act, when families were allowed to go out and stake their claims. Well, Black people weren't allowed to do that. They were left out of that. Yeah, after the New Deal, FDR, the New Deal, all these low interest loans and low, African Americans were left out of that largely as well. And now, when you talk about being able to own land and own homes, that is how you accumulate wealth in this country. That has been proven to be the basis for the soldiers coming back. Well, a lot of Black officers, a lot of Black soldiers did not get those low interest loans. And also, they were barred from moving out into those fresh new subdivisions that they were building. Then all of a sudden, the prices of the lots go up. The prices of the house were guaranteed to go up. That's accumulated wealth just on the color of your skin.
Yeah.
So you have to understand that there's decades of this that have been building up, and some families have taken great advantage of it. And I think the white Americans who struggle with this is maybe the ones whose family did not maybe go upper class, or even with all of that, they didn't go upper class. So they feel like, well, my dad or my grandfather struggled, so it must be the same for others. But hey, I'm struggling just like some Black people. Mm-hmm. And I think those are people those are the people that are hard to really tell them or express to them that these things are happening, because they see, that they're living the same lives as some of the people who are asking for equal freedoms, and they don't understand how they can't put that together.
Yeah, and then when you're born into that money, and I mean, as we know, America is rooted in capitalism, which capitalism and racism goes hand in hand. Yes. And so, when you grow up in capitalism and you grow up white, it's almost like you're brainwashed into racism. Mm-hmm. And this 2020, I mean, obviously we've had all the movements, but they want to make this Black Lives Matter movement as a Marxist, anti-American, anti-whatever movement. Right. When it's what they're scared of is they're just scared of being uncomfortable. They're just they're scared that, God forbid, it's going to be different. Like I hear Trump, he says Joe Biden's going to ruin your suburban neighborhoods. And what that means is minorities are going to move into your neighborhood, so be careful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly what he's saying, the same things they said back in the 40s and 50s. Mm-hmm. He's saying the same things then when in the late 40s, early 50s, after World War II, when we really had the boom of the second middle class in this country, and we started having the families go out to the suburbs, which was partly one of the big motivators for that, was the low interest loans that GIs got. You had all those people come back from fighting, they were able to get low interest loans, build houses, and have their own communities. Some of those communities had specific language in the contracts from when you bought a home in those communities that they would not allow any Black people to live in there. So that they purposefully formed communities to get away from everyone else so that they could have their own communities. Later that started to break down once the civil rights movement really got going, and people started realizing how wrong it was, which they knew already, but they wanted to keep themselves separate. But it's a lot of just bad information. You have to be able to unlearn lessons. And I think as a group, humans, that's one of the hardest things we encounter, is because we don't want to unlearn things because we tie our identity to those things. People who tie their self-worth or their identity or their status in society to certain ideals don't want those things to break down, because then they got to re-examine themselves and what they've done and how they fit into this. A great example of this is after the Revolutionary War, after the Civil War, Daughters of the Confederacy. This wasn't even immediately after. This was years after, when they realized that these rich Southern belles, who were daughters of landowners and business owners, once they lost the romanticized version of the Confederacy, they're not going to be these massive socialites and have this part in society. So what did they do? They got together and formed a group and lobbied Congress, the government, to be able to write their version of their own state's histories. That's how we got all of these different versions of history in all the different states, because in the South, the Daughters of the Confederacy wanted to maintain the pride and the pageantry and the idea that the Confederates fighting for noble things and trying to preserve a way of life. And so they painted it like that in our textbooks. And you have people right now still trying to explain away slavery as not that bad, which is absolutely
ridiculous. Someone just said that. It was like, I forget who it was. It was someone in the government that said that it was a necessary evil. Like, how are you still saying that?
Like, you know how disconnected you have to be from your own humanity to say that enslaving a group of people for that long, when the rest of the world had stopped doing it on a grand scale. Yes, there's still some little pockets of slavery that went on after that. It actually continued in the US for a while after that. And there's other countries, but the country that the people that started our nation came from did not write slavery into their laws. Yes, England had slavery, but they never wrote it into their laws. We wrote it into our laws in this country. Like, it's part of our Constitution. You know, we had to ratify it and change it, but to say that it was necessary to amass that much money in such a short amount of time. Yes, it was necessary to do that, because how else are you going to get a product where you pretty much living off the profits and not really paying any overhead? You know, so yeah, that's a great way to accumulate wealth. Yeah, that's a necessary for that.
And you said that, and then you were mentioning about, like, you know, land laws and stuff, and you know, people will always go to that was history. You know, that was a long time ago. But first of all, it wasn't that long ago. It wasn't even that long ago.
No.
In a grand scheme of things. It wasn't long ago. And all they do is just fix it in a way to, you know, just make it different. There's still slavery in a way. The prison system's slavery. You know, yes. You profit off people, locking them up, making them do manual work. Like, that is slavery. Yeah. There's a reason why jails are overpopulated all around the country. It's the reason why we're like the only country on earth that jails people for nothing, like a thing of weed, 5 years in prison. You know, like we're the only country that does that, and it's just to find loopholes in our history from years ago, just trying to find new ways to do it.
Oh, and they always have. I mean, I read a stat that said if you're an African American, you have a 36% chance of going to jail in your lifetime. Like that. Like, it's there's a 1 out of every 3 African Americans has gone to jail or will go to jail in their lifetime.
Yeah,
which is absolutely bananas. When you talk about the prison population, that's something they've been doing for a very long time. Even during Reconstruction, they had this thing called convict leasing. Basically they would just lock up poor people and Black people for absolutely doing little or nothing, if anything, or sometimes just taking the word of someone else, put them in jail. They get that cheap labor. And then what they did was they would actually lease out the convicts to these companies, you know, and they're paying pennies on the dollar for their work. State gets a little bit of money out of it, the companies get it, and that's how they keep that cycle going. And now in the prison system, we're the most imprisoned, like first world country on this planet. Like, we imprison more people than anybody.
And it's not really close either.
No, and if the point of sending people to jail is to correct, because we call them correctional facilities, then crime would have gone down by now if that really worked. You know, I mean, we don't have as much violent crime now, like since the 90s, as we did before, but we still have pretty much the same rate of crime itself. So if the idea behind the penitentiary, if the idea behind these correctional facilities are to make people not want to steal, then this is a failed experiment, and we have to admit it. Because we're putting more people in jail, which means more people are committing crimes. So that way that we're going about it is not working. And when you look at the African American community in this, they're clearly being preyed upon by police and the law, because we are 13 to 14% of this nation as far as population, but with 30% of prisons. That means you're 5 times more likely to go to jail if you're black than if you're white, which is, and those numbers. And this is another thing where I think people they try to convince themselves of the severity of something by just using raw data, because we talk about like the number of African Americans that get killed by policemen versus non-African Americans. Well, the numbers may not be as high as a total as white Americans, but the percentage is way different. And that's just the ones that we've been reported, because you have to remember, up until a few years ago, they did not actually have to report killings by police. So some precincts volunteered their information. Some just said, we're not going to do it. So they didn't actually have to do the reporting. You are 2.8, 3 times more likely to be killed by an officer if you're black or if you're white.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that walking out of your house, you don't ever worry about that. Like, you might worry about, somebody yelling at you or something, but you're not worried about dying.
No. When the George Floyd murder happened, that was like a conversation I was having with my family, with my dad especially. I'm like, there's never been a time where I left the house ever in my life where you thought, like, the thought of me being pulled over and it ending in me dying ever crossed your mind. Like, that's never crossed your mind once in your life. And it's never crossed mine. So I've never been pulled over. I've been driving for I've been in a car one time with someone getting pulled over, but I have never been pulled over. I drove for 8 months with no headlights and didn't get pulled over. And the sad thing is that's a death sentence for people.
Yeah. All you got to have is the wrong mixture of personalities in that interaction, and someone could lose their lives. I mean, I've been pulled over for driving. I got pulled over in South Carolina with luckily my parents were behind me. My grandfather was behind them. We were all driving from where my grandparents lived up to my parents' house. And a cop pulled me over because I was driving my mom's Jaguar, which is a little town in South Carolina. And they pulled up, not just one car, but one car pulled up, and then like 5 seconds later, 1, 2, 3 more cars pulled up. You got people standing up, screaming, and like, what's going on here? And they said, well, I weaved across the line. So they brought like 4 cop cars full of officers. Like, it was at least 8 officers there easily, because I swerved across the line. So they say now they were young, because my grandfather, who's my size, he's a pretty big man. He was actually wider than me. He gets out of his car, and they got him pinned up against the car, telling him, don't move, like, So ended up all of that. They found out who we were and my family was. And then all of a sudden it became this big apology thing. No ticket was issued. No charges were ever filed. But what I'm saying is, it's stuff like that. I've been pulled over on South Beach, coming back from a club. Me and my friend, and we had some lady friends we had in the car. We were dating, having a good time. I'm driving on the road right on I want to say Washington Avenue, I think. And as I'm going this way, a cop come toward me, looks in the truck. I could see him looking at me. Does a U-turn in the middle of the street, and I see him, so I just pull over because I knew what was happening. He pulled me over. I just pulled over to a gas station. He pulls me over. He goes, "What are you, some kind of pimp or something?" It's the first words he said to me. He didn't say, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" He didn't say, "You did this or you did that," because they didn't do anything. He pulled me over because he saw me and my friend in the car, had a couple girls in the car in a nice truck, and he's whatever's going through his mind. But he pulled me over. I wasn't drunk, because when I go out, I just stop drinking like an hour and a half before I leave, especially if I'm driving, just because that's just kind of, so there was no alcohol in the car. I wasn't drunk. He had no reason to pull me over. And then I know, like, a lot of people, when these things happen, they go, "Oh man, I would have told him this." No, you won't, because you're too scared. Like, I was shaking because I did not know what was going to happen. So I'm as polite as I can possibly be. I'm quiet. I'm showing all my information, even though like, and he just walks away from the car. That's it. Because he had nothing. So pulled me over, he just walked away from the car. No, I did not think to get his batch number. No, I didn't. Like, no, like this was like
Yeah.
2000. Like, you don't, all those things don't go through your mind, you know? Like,
You
I
just
had a
worried for your
friend.
life at that point.
Yeah, I had a friend that we had this argument about George Floyd's friend saying George Floyd is a coward because he didn't jump in and help him. I'm like, I'm not going to say his name, but I'm like, dude, you know, you live a different life. Like, Black people don't even dream of jumping into something with the cops when somebody's like, you're going to get shot too. Like, how do you think that's going to end? I'm like, and he's like calling them names. I'm like, really? So you think that situation is going to get any better if this dude's friend jumps into this?
Yeah. No.
Like,
It's the only way. It's funny you say that because I've had that conversation before, and it was based on the George Floyd thing. Is like, what do you do as a bystander, as a white bystander in that situation? Because you're seeing that go on, you know, I hope morally in your mind, the first thing in your mind is you should get this to stop. And it's like, because you know, if you're a Black person, probably Hispanic person too, if you go and tackle the cop, if you Derek Chauvin, if you go and tackle Derek Chauvin, like you said, it's going to end in you dying. As a white person, and this is the conversation I was having, I think you have the moral responsibility. If you see a cop with a gun pointed to a Black man's head or his knees on his head, I think you do have the moral responsibility to go in there and do your best, even if it's you doing something physical to the cop, because percentages say you're not gonna die from that. Go to jail, probably, but jail is worth, you know, saving a man's life.
It's such a different life experience, and I think it's hard to get someone to understand it. And even this, all yes, I do talk a lot about it, and I do try to help people understand, but I'm not trying to be antagonistic. Like, I'm not trying to say, oh, you guys this, you know, that's like, I'm trying to bring you in. I'm trying to bring us in as a human family to say that, why would you accept this for me if you would not accept it for yourself? Like, if you would not let your kids, like right now, young black girls in school are 6 times more likely to be suspended than any other group of kids. Like, that goes on your record. That affects your ability to get in colleges and stuff. But for the white kids, they get therapy or they have a meeting, or, you know. So why would you accept that for someone else if you wouldn't accept that for your kids? Why would you accept the rate that police are killing African Americans if you would not accept that for you? Why would you accept, you know, just some of the blatant policies, like your hair has to look a certain way? Like, Black people for a while, and they're just changing now, couldn't wear their hair in their natural state at some jobs. They had to, the women have to straighten their hair, put all these crazy chemicals in their hair to give it a more European look, to be acceptable in the workplace. Like, yeah, all of these things, we don't realize how they build up.
Yeah, I mean, I went to a school that, for when I was younger, they had one of those hair policies, and you know, at the time I was too young to know what that meant, but like, it's amazing how many things you like look back on and it was like, oh wow, that was racist. You know, like you're just like thinking like, oh, that time, that experience, wow, I didn't realize how racist that was. Like, you know, like, and I think, like I said earlier, it's just, it deals with white people. Not only are they're comfortable with their privilege, and they just hate being, I'm not even sure if it's like they don't want to be challenged. It's just they're so comfortable, and as bad as it sounds, is for a lot of them, it's too beneficial for them. And you hear that with when, you know, people want to talk about socialism and all that. It's like, maybe they do agree, but it's too beneficial, so they're not going to do anything, you know. So, but which is just as bad as being the one that believes it.
Yeah, well, we've gotten to a point in this country where, well, really in a lot of society, where we look at everything as terms of, what do I get out of it? How does this benefit me? And we sometimes lose sight of what sacrifice and what humanity really is. Like, and anytime you work for something, like for you, there are times where you had to get that work done. You had to focus on, you had to, write this, whatever. You had to sacrifice. You had to give up maybe drinking with your friends. You may have to give up going out on a date. There are things that you had to sacrifice to get a platform that you're working with right now. There are some things that you had to put aside. Mm-hmm. And that shows its real worth to you. So I'm going to bring back what I was saying earlier. People think about what they can get out of something. That doesn't mean you're committed to anything. Your true commitment shows in what you're willing to give up to get something. That's how you know you're committed to something. Like, I have 2 daughters. There's so many things I've changed in my life and given up because I want everything for them to be good. There are things that you sacrifice. You know what? Yeah, I could, but I don't need that because this is going to help them. Mm-hmm. And when we start talking about equality and everyone being equal socially, if you're not willing to give up something to get that, then your words are empty because you're saying, I want it, but not at a price. Not even thinking about the price that the people who you're not allowing to get to this playing level have already incurred. Like they've gone through this cost. They've paid this cost. They've given up. And because of your comfort and how good things are for you, you're willing to let this other group of people struggle.
Yeah. And like that brings me to, and we're going back to your Sports Illustrated article here. You mentioned, and this is something that I said too on Twitter, is these leagues, these white athletes, these prominent people, they all made their statement. They all put their black square on Instagram. But it seemed like a lot of them, MLB, I know didn't say it in their statement. The NFL at first didn't say it. There was no mention of police brutality. There was no mention of a murder. It was just the simple fact we don't stand for racism. And which is you might as well have said nothing. And it's like you might as well have just said we don't have a comment on the situation. Because saying it shouldn't be a statement that you don't stand for racism. Like that shouldn't have to be publicly said. Like it should be known, which isn't true because in the NFL we know we have the Colin Kaepernick situation. But so, and you mentioned it, is like, and baseball now they're starting to take the knee. And do you question all of this movements for these sports teams that they're in good faith?
Of course I question it. And I think we should question everything. Mm-hmm. It's like this. If I come to you and give you a test, and you come back and you give me the answer to the test, well, I still need to see your work. I need to know how, like, what gives you this answer? So if you're not doing the work, it doesn't matter. I need to see what programs they're putting in place. I need to see them having actual relationships, meaningful relationships and conversations with law enforcement about this. Because there's a lot of money that exchanges hands between professional sports and law enforcement. A lot of these, the security gigs that they get at these stadiums, protecting the players at these stadiums. Like there's a lot of interaction between pro sports and law enforcement. And if they're really going to take a stand, they need to say something and do something that's going to be really meaningful. But if you remember the Kenny Stills incident in Miami, you had the police openly coming out saying that they would not perform security for the stadium.
Yeah.
The Dolphins never said anything about that.
Never made a statement or anything. I didn't even think about that.
Right. So we're talking about the group of people who are committing these injustices among a person like Kenny Stills. And Kenny Stills are saying, we just need to recognize this is happening. And I know Kenny Stills, we've seen his work down here. Kenny Stills is one of the most stand-up guys you ever want to meet. Yeah. He takes us off days. He would go out with police. Go out with the community with the police. He went to hospitals. Like Kenny Stills did everything in the community you want out of your players to do. He was there. He was present. And that organization that he was working for refused to back him. So when I hear these organizations say the right things, I always have to remember that I need to see the work. It's that simple.
And it's funny you mentioned Kenny Stills, because I saw this yesterday, and it was the first thing that popped in my mind. There was a certain, I can remember clearly the first day. I don't know if you remember. I think you might have actually commented on this before. I'm not 100% sure, because I remember there was someone on someone affiliated with the Marlins at the time that commented on it.
Yeah.
There was a certain individual on the Marlins the day that Kenny Stills' I don't know if you remember, he dropped the touchdown pass.
Yeah.
And a certain individual on the Marlins tweeted karma.
Yeah.
#karma. And yesterday, the certain individual is not on the Marlins anymore. And I see on Instagram, MLB front page, MLB's Instagram page, he's wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he probably, I don't know. I didn't see the Brewers game. I don't know if he need or not. I know he has family in the military or whatever, even though that has nothing to do with anything. But that's where I was like, this is all such in bad faith. Because I remember you, Mr. Guy on my Instagram feed, saying that dropping a touchdown pass was karma for a man taking a knee about Black people being killed by police officers.
Yeah. 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 I mean, just the incongruity of that is absolutely just mind-boggling. But it also goes to show you how we sometimes mindlessly say things without thinking about the implications of what we're actually saying. For a guy to miss a play, it's like that. Like, there's nothing further from that than someone dying. Like we're talking about, and I mean, let's be honest. We this whole karma thing, yeah, I do believe there's certain energy that goes around, but I also know a lot of people that have done a lot of awful things that have amassed a lot of success and wealth. So I don't know what form their karma's coming in, but it's not in success and money, that's for sure.
It's like the people that like swears that cancel culture is so real, but there's so many bad people with their platforms still. Like, if cancel culture was real, there would be a very lack of entertainment in our world, because a lot of people would have been canceled by now.
Yeah, I mean, people still love Elvis. He and Priscilla were together when she was like 13, 14 years old. Yeah. Rob Lowe's still on TV. He was 20-some years old, had a 16-year-old girl in bed. Like, we don't cancel people. We try to cancel people that we don't agree with the ideology that they speak about. Other than that, we don't cancel anybody. We just get mad and move on. I was
gonna say, we cancel someone for one day until the next white person says something dumb, which is the next day, and then it's like that person's like, "Oh, thank God." It's like, thank God someone else was a little bit more racist than I was, or a little bit more sexist, or a little bit more of a sexual predator than I was.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what that is? That is the result of reality TV. Like, we got into this phase. I don't know if you really picked up when reality TV kicked in, and we started having people sitting at home watching other people destroy their lives and go, well, at least I got it better than them. Like, we started that whole culture of watching absolutely absurd behavior and just praying that the cameras are rolling when that train went off the tracks. And now we're doing that in our society. Like, we prop people up that we should not be listening to what Kanye says about politics. We know he needs his medication. We know, like, we've seen him go through this before. He had a Black man say slavery was a choice. He needs help. But we're okay with him going out and saying whatever he wants when he's got on a red hat because he fits a certain ideology. Now he's okay. Now he's one of the good ones. All right. Now he's one of the good ones. But that's the same guy who stood up there after Katrina and said, George Bush doesn't care about Black people, and then demonized him. It's the same person.
Yeah.
But now he's just saying something you agree with. Yeah. So the only thing got involved in this was your ego. Nothing else changes in that situation. So there's no cancel culture. There isn't. You know why? because people don't do enough reading or enough research to actually understand what the root of something really is. So they will go away from it. And then when that person makes another hit song or another hot movie, they'll come back to it. I mean, I think the only one in Hollywood that really hasn't bounced back was Mel Gibson, which I'm not upset about that. But I mean,
think about Drew Brees. Drew Brees came out and said what he said about Kaepernick and what he said about kneeling for the anthem. And it took, what, 48 hours for him to be back?
Yeah.
Like 40. People were like, oh, what did the Saints should release Drew Brees. The Saints should release Drew Brees. It took, what, 40? All he had to do was, I did research. He put out, I did research. I'm sorry. And it's like, everyone's like, Drew Brees, the new Drew Brees. Yeah, the new Drew Brees. It's insane.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Look how easily we accept the apologies of like these white athletes or white actors from some of the terrible things they do. And look how much we hold black athletes' feet to the fire for every little misstep. I mean, Riley Cooper went out and just said the most racist thing you could say.
Yeah.
And they had Michael Vick. They had Michael Vick come and hold his hand and tell everybody he's okay. You know, like, he's all right. But then Kaepernick wears a pair of socks that people don't agree with. And now, you know, like, yeah, you know, it's there's such an easier path to exception and redemption for a certain group than there is for other groups. I mean, yeah, come on. We talked about, well, I don't know if you were in one of these conversations on Twitter like a long time ago when I talked about Wes Welker and like Julian Edelman. Like, you got guys who are scrappy players. They're great receivers. But yeah, one of them did win a championship in a season where he got caught for PEDs. That just, I mean, he got suspended for the first 4 games of the season. And I'm like, well, why can't you mention that? Like, you know, if you're a player on a team that wins a championship and you get busted for steroids or whatever, like, yeah, that should be part of the conversation. Why are we hiding from that? Like, you don't hide from, like, every time you see Michael Vick, they talk about the dog stuff. Like, why is it such an easier path to redemption for some people and not others? And we've just come to accept that in our society. You know, I mean, we love the Rolling Stones and we know about all the stuff they did, but every time you see a rapper like go to like a hotel and somebody smells weed, it's in the newspaper, you know?
Yeah. And